The crystal chandeliers of the Rothschild estate cast dancing shadows across tables draped in ivory silk. Victoria adjusted her diamond necklace, a gift from her family's fortune, and surveyed the room with practiced superiority. Beside her sat her husband, Daniel, quiet as always in his modest suit that seemed almost apologetic among the sea of designer tuxedos. "More champagne, darling." Victoria's voice carried that peculiar mixture of affection and condescension that had become her trademark. "Oh, but perhaps not. We wouldn't want you embarrassing yourself in front of important people." Laughter rippled around their table. Among the guests were the Hastings family, owners of the city's largest real estate empire, the Vandermeers who controlled the shipping industry, and Preston Blackwell, the tech magnate whose company had revolutionized digital banking. "Victoria, really," murmured her mother, Catherine, though her smile suggested she found the jabs amusing rather than cruel. "Daniel is family now." "Of course he is," Victoria replied, patting her husband's hand with exaggerated sweetness. "I'm simply grateful he had the wisdom to marry well. Not everyone can say they've ascended from." She paused dramatically, wherever he came from, to dining with the most powerful families in the country. Daniel said nothing, merely took a measured sip of water. His silence, as usual, seemed to confirm Victoria's narrative. 5 years of marriage had established a clear dynamic. She was the sun around which their social world orbited, and he was the fortunate satellite pulled along by her gravitational force. "I heard your quarterly earnings broke records, Preston," Victoria continued, turning her attention to the tech mogul. "You must be thrilled with your new venture capital fund." Preston Blackwell straightened, clearly pleased. "Indeed. The returns have exceeded even our most optimistic projections. Our investment strategy has proven remarkably sound." "Investment strategy?" Victoria laughed. "You make it sound so complicated. My father always said success in business is 10% strategy and 90% knowing the right people. Isn't that right, Daddy?" Her father, Theodore Whitmore III, raised his glass. "Connections are currency, my dear. Always have been." Daniel's fingers drummed once against the table, so briefly that only someone watching closely would have noticed. He glanced at his watch, then returned his attention to his untouched salmon. "Oh, Daniel, am I boring you?" Victoria's voice sharpened. "I forget. Business talk must be so tedious when you're not actually in business. What is it you do again during the day? Some kind of consulting?" "Something like that," Daniel replied quietly. "Something like that." Victoria threw her hands up in mock exasperation, playing to her audience. 5 years married and I still can't explain my husband's job. But that's all right. Someone has to be the mysterious one in the relationship. I'll continue being the successful one." The table erupted in polite laughter. Even Daniel's lips curved slightly, though whether in amusement or something else entirely was impossible to discern. What none of them noticed was the slight tension in Preston Blackwell's jaw, or the way Margaret Hastings had stopped eating, or how shipping magnate Victor Vandermeer had suddenly become very interested in his wine glass. The first course was cleared away. The night was still young, and Daniel had not yet spoken. The main course arrived with theatrical flourish, Wagyu beef prepared tableside with truffle reduction. Victoria held court, her voice growing louder with each glass of wine, her stories increasingly designed to showcase her superiority while diminishing Daniel's role in their marriage. "Tell them about the charity gala, Daniel," she prompted. "The one where you spent the entire evening hiding in the library because you couldn't handle networking. Meanwhile, I secured 3 major donations for the Children's Hospital. Single-handedly, I might add." "I'm sure Daniel contributed in his own way," offered Margaret Hastings carefully. The real estate mogul's wife had always been more circumspect than the others. "Oh, absolutely," Victoria agreed with exaggerated enthusiasm. "He's wonderful at being supportive. That's a skill too, isn't it? Not everyone can be a leader." Across the table, Preston Blackwell's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowned, then excused himself quietly. Victor Vandermeer's phone followed moments later. Then Margaret Hastings received a call that drew the color from her face. "Everything all right?" Theodore Whitmore asked, noticing the sudden exodus. Fine, fine, Preston said quickly, returning to his seat. But his hand trembled slightly as he reached for his wine. Just business matters. Nothing that can't wait. But it clearly couldn't wait. Within minutes, more phones were buzzing. Hushed conversations erupted around the room. The Hastings were whispering urgently. The Vandermeers looked stricken. Even the typically unflappable Preston Blackwell had developed a sheen of sweat on his forehead. Good heavens, what's going on? Catherine demanded. This is highly irregular. Mrs. Whitmore, Preston began, his voice strained. I apologize for the disruption, but I've just received word that my primary investors are reconsidering their positions. All of them. Simultaneously. It's unprecedented. That's impossible, Theodore scoffed. Investors don't just. Ours are too, Victor Vandermeer interrupted. His jovial demeanor completely vanished. Every major backer of our shipping expansion is withdrawing. They're citing concerns about leadership and strategic direction. Margaret Hastings set down her fork with shaking hands. Our construction projects. All of them, every development we have in progress, the financing has been frozen. The banks are calling in our lines of credit. Victoria laughed nervously. This is absurd. What are the odds that all of you would face financial crises at the exact same dinner party? Someone must be orchestrating this. The table fell silent. Slowly, impossibly, every eye turned toward the one person who hadn't seemed surprised by any of the revelations. Daniel carefully cut his beef, chewed thoughtfully, and swallowed before speaking. The odds are 100%, he said quietly, when that someone is in the room. Victoria's laugh died in her throat. What are you talking about? Daniel set down his knife and fork with precise movements. Preston, your venture capital fund was built on investments from Meridian Holdings, correct? And Victor, your shipping expansion was financed through Pacific Maritime Investment Group. Margaret, your construction projects draw credit from North Point Capital. Each named party nodded slowly, confused. I am Meridian Holdings, Daniel said simply. I am Pacific Maritime. I am North Point Capital. I am the silent partner in every major business venture at this table. The silence was deafening. That's... Victoria's voice cracked. That's not possible. You're a consultant. I consult with myself quite frequently, Daniel replied. It's efficient. Theodore Whitmore's face had gone from ruddy to ashen. This is preposterous. I know every major player in this city's financial sector. I've never heard of. You've heard of Titan Holdings, Daniel interrupted gently. The investment firm that bailed out your commercial real estate portfolio in 2019 when you overextended on the waterfront development. Theodore's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. You structured that bailout, Daniel continued, in exchange for a 30% stake in Whitmore Industries. You thought you were dealing with a consortium of international investors. You were dealing with me. I own 30% of your company, Theodore. I've owned it for 6 years, a year before I married Victoria. Catherine's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against her plate. That's not. You were nobody. You came from nothing. I came from very careful planning, Daniel corrected. Preston, do you remember the angel investor who gave you your first $1 million? The one who asked for nothing but a small equity stake and complete anonymity. Preston's face had gone grey. That was 15 years ago. I was nobody then. Just a kid with an idea. You were a brilliant kid with a revolutionary idea, Daniel said. I invested in 17 startups that year. 12 failed. 5 succeeded beyond imagination. Yours was the most successful. I now own 42% of Blackwell Technologies through various shell corporations and investment vehicles. Victoria's hand clutched at her throat. You're lying. This is some kind of sick joke. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a thin tablet. He tapped it several times, then turned it so everyone at the table could see. Financial documents scrolled across the screen, incorporation papers, investment agreements, stock certificates, all bearing different company names but the same signature at the bottom. Daniel Rothschild. His wife's surname, adopted upon marriage, but his signature nonetheless. "I don't use my own name in business," he explained. "I learned early that anonymity is the ultimate power. When people know who holds their leash, they either rebel or become obsequious. When they don't know, they simply perform as expected." Victor Vandermeer's voice shook with rage. "Why? If you had this kind of wealth and power, why live like this? Why marry into this family? Why subject yourself to—" He gestured at Victoria, who looked like she might faint. "Why marry someone who would mock me publicly?" Daniel finished. "That's an excellent question, Victor. The answer is simple. I needed to see who people really were when they thought I was powerless. Wealth attracts sycophants. Perceived weakness reveals truth." He turned to face his wife directly for the first time that evening. "Victoria, I loved you when we met. I thought perhaps, if you loved me without knowing about my wealth, it might be real. Different from every relationship I'd had before." Tears streamed down Victoria's face, leaving trails through her makeup. "Daniel, For 5 years, I've watched you mock me, diminish me, use me as a punchline to elevate yourself in the eyes of people whose businesses I literally control. I kept waiting for you to love me for who I am, not what I could give you. But you made it clear, I was only valuable as a stepping stone, as proof of your superiority." "I didn't know," Victoria whispered. "How could I know?" "That's precisely the point," Daniel said softly. "You didn't know, and so you showed me exactly who you are. A woman who derives her sense of worth from putting others beneath her." Preston Blackwell leaned forward, desperation creeping into his voice. "If you're going to destroy us, just do it. Don't drag this out." "Destroy you?" Daniel looked genuinely surprised. "Preston, your company is sound. Your technology is revolutionary. I'm not withdrawing my investment. I'm simply restructuring, introducing transparency. You'll know who your primary backer is now. We'll work together openly." He turned to the Vandermeers. "Victor, your shipping routes are brilliant, but your expansion plan was overambitious. I'm not pulling funding. I'm slowing it down, making it sustainable. You'll thank me in 5 years when you're not overextended." Then to the Hastings, "Margaret, your construction projects are economically viable but environmentally disastrous. We're going to redesign them. Green building, sustainable materials. It'll take longer and cost more initially, but the long-term value will triple." The table sat in stunned silence as Daniel's words settled over them like snow, beautiful and suffocating all at once. He wasn't destroying them. He was reshaping them. And somehow, that was more terrifying than any financial attack could have been. "And me." Theodore Whitmore's voice had lost all its bombast. "What are you planning for Whitmore Industries?" Daniel considered this carefully. "Your business practices are outdated but functional. Your treatment of employees is adequate but uninspired. Your daughter, however—" He paused, his eyes finding Victoria's. "Your daughter has spent 5 years building a social media presence based on philanthropic work funded entirely by my money, funneled through trusts she believed were her inheritance." Victoria's sob caught in her throat. "The hospital wing. The scholarship fund. All mine," Daniel confirmed. "Every donation made in the Whitmore name over the past 5 years traced back to accounts I controlled. You were generous with money you thought was yours. I wonder if you'll be as generous when you know the truth." Catherine found her voice, sharp with maternal protection despite everything. "What do you want, then? Revenge? To humiliate my daughter?" "I wanted honesty," Daniel said simply. "And I've gotten it. Now everyone at this table knows who I am. What happens next is up to each of you." He stood, buttoning his modest jacket. "Preston, my assistant will contact you Monday morning. We'll discuss the restructuring. Victor, expect a call Tuesday. Margaret, Wednesday. Theodore." He looked at his father-in-law with something between pity and disappointment. We'll need to have a much longer conversation about the future of your company and your family's role in it. You can't just leave, Victoria burst out, rising from her chair. You can't drop this bomb and walk away. What about us? What about our marriage? Daniel's expression softened slightly. Our marriage has been a performance, Victoria. You've spent 5 years playing the role of the successful woman who married down. I've played the role of the lucky fool who married up. Neither of us has been honest. Because you were lying. Victoria's voice cracked. Every day, every moment, you were lying to me. I was silent, Daniel corrected. There's a difference. You never asked about my work. You never asked about my past. You never asked about anything that didn't serve your narrative. I didn't lie, Victoria. I simply didn't correct your assumptions. Preston Blackwell spoke up, his business mind working even through the shock. This was all a test. This entire evening, you planned this. I did, Daniel acknowledged. I told Victoria 2 weeks ago that I had something important to discuss tonight. She chose this venue, this guest list. She orchestrated this dinner specifically to showcase her superiority in front of the city's elite. I simply allowed events to unfold. Allowed. Theodore stood, his chair scraping harshly against marble. You manipulated all of us. You've been pulling strings like we're puppets. I've been investing my money wisely, Daniel replied calmly. When you take someone's money, you accept certain strings. That's not manipulation. That's business. Every person at this table understood that when they accepted my investments, they just didn't know it was me they were accepting from. He moved toward the door, then paused. There will be legal documents arriving at each of your offices tomorrow. Nothing punitive. I have no interest in destroying any of you. Just transparency. You'll know exactly who owns what, where the money flows, and what expectations I have going forward. And what are those expectations? Margaret Hastings asked quietly. Daniel turned back. That you run your businesses with integrity. That you treat people, all people, regardless of their perceived status, with basic respect. That you remember success isn't about who you're above, but what you build. His eyes found Victoria's one last time. I'll have my attorneys contact you about the separation. You'll be provided for. I'm not cruel. But our marriage, such as it was, is over. I hope you find someone who you can love without needing to diminish them. Daniel, please. Victoria took a step toward him, but he held up a hand. I hope someday you understand that the person you mocked all those years was exactly the person you claimed to want. Successful. Powerful. Influential. But you couldn't see it because it didn't come packaged the way you expected. That's the real tragedy here, Victoria. Not that I had money, but that you loved status more than you could ever love a person. With that, Daniel walked out of the Rothschild estate, leaving behind a table of the city's most powerful people, all of them suddenly unsure of everything they thought they knew. The silence stretched for a long minute. Then Theodore Whitmore's phone rang. And Preston Blackwell's. And Victor Vandermeer's. Monday morning had come early. 3 months later, the social landscape of the city had transformed in ways both subtle and seismic. Preston Blackwell sat in his office, now reorganized with Daniel as acknowledged chairman of the board, reviewing quarterly reports that showed unprecedented growth. Working openly with his primary investor had eliminated the paranoia and second-guessing that had plagued his previous decisions. Innovation had accelerated. Stock prices had soared. I should have known, he muttered to his CFO. All those years, anonymous angel investor, never asking for control, just guiding. Making suggestions that always panned out. I thought I was lucky. You were lucky, his CFO replied. Just not in the way you thought. Down in the Harbour District, Victor Vandermeer walked through a redesigned shipping facility, now incorporating half the planned expansion at twice the efficiency. The environmental upgrades Daniel had insisted on were attracting government contracts and positive media attention. His company's valuation had actually increased despite the scaled-back expansion. Slower, he told his operations manager, is sometimes faster. Margaret Hastings stood in a construction site, watching crews install solar panels and rainwater collection systems on what would become the city's first fully sustainable residential complex. The initial budget overruns had been terrifying, but pre-sales had exceeded projections by 300%. Everyone wanted to live in the building that was doing it right. "He saw something we didn't," she told her husband that evening. "All of us, we were so busy getting rich that we forgot to ask if we were building anything worth having." At the Whitmore estate, things were quieter. Theodore had aged a decade in 3 months. The restructuring of Whitmore Industries had been painful. Daniel had insisted on ethical audits, fair labor practices, and transparent accounting. It had revealed inefficiencies and improprieties that Theodore had either ignored or enabled for years. 30%, he muttered to Catherine over breakfast. He owned 30% and never said a word. He could have destroyed us at any moment. "He still could," Catherine replied, her voice subdued. "But he won't. He's not interested in destruction. He never was." What was he interested in, then? Catherine was quiet for a long moment. "I think he was interested in being seen. Really seen. And we all failed him." Across town, in a modest but elegant apartment, Victoria sat surrounded by cardboard boxes. The divorce had been finalized quickly. Daniel had been generous to a fault with the settlement, giving her more than she'd brought to the marriage. But money, she discovered, was a poor substitute for purpose. Her phone buzzed. Another message from a former friend, someone who'd laughed at her jokes, enjoyed her parties, benefited from her connections. They'd all disappeared when the truth came out. When Victoria went from being the woman who'd married up to the woman who'd married the most powerful man in the city and never noticed. She'd become a joke. But worse, she'd become invisible. Her lawyer had suggested a rebranding campaign. Her publicist recommended a tell-all interview, playing the victim. Her mother called daily with strategies for social rehabilitation. Victoria ignored them all. Instead, she volunteered at the Children's Hospital, the one with the wing that still bore her name, though she now knew who'd really paid for it. She worked quietly, without fanfare, reading to sick children and organizing donation drives. No social media posts. No photographers. No narrative. Just work. "Mrs. Roth," the nurse caught herself. "Ms. Whitmore, there's a young man here asking for you." Victoria looked up to find a teenager she'd been reading to for weeks, a cancer patient named Timothy who'd been silent and withdrawn since his diagnosis. "I wrote something," Timothy said shyly, holding out a folded paper. "A thank you. For being here. For not giving up on us." Victoria's eyes stung as she read the Cren-written note. It was the first time in months anyone had thanked her for anything she'd actually done. "May I keep this?" she asked softly. Timothy nodded, smiling for the first time since she'd met him. That evening, Victoria sat in her half-packed apartment and did something she hadn't done in years. She thought about what she actually wanted, not what looked good, not what impressed others, but what mattered to her. Her phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello. It's Daniel." Victoria's breath caught. They hadn't spoken since the divorce proceedings. "I saw the work you're doing at the hospital," he continued. "The real work. Not the photo opportunities. You've been watching. I'm still the primary donor. I pay attention." A pause. "I wanted you to know I'm proud of you. That's all. I don't expect anything, and I'm not asking for anything. I just thought you should hear it." Victoria's hand tightened on the phone. "Daniel, I'm sorry. For everything. For not seeing you. For not." "I know," he said gently. "I've always known. That's why I'm calling. Not to reconcile, we're past that. But to tell you that who you're becoming now? This person who works without applause? She's someone worth knowing. Don't lose her." The line went quiet, then, "Take care of yourself, Victoria." He hung up before she could respond. Victoria sat in the silence, Daniel's words echoing. Then she looked around at her boxes, at her old life packed away, and made a decision. She picked up her phone and called the hospital administrator. "I'd like to increase my volunteer hours," she said. "Full-time, if possible. And I'd like to learn about hospital administration. Not for publicity, for real. I want to actually help run the programs." 6 months later, the city's social pages had largely forgotten about Victoria Whitmore. But the Children's Hospital remembered. The new pediatric art therapy program, funded and administered by a quiet woman who'd once been famous for her parties, was transforming young lives. Preston Blackwell's company had become an industry leader in ethical tech. The Vandermeer shipping line was winning environmental awards. Hastings Construction was building the city of the future. And Daniel remained largely invisible, a signature on documents, a voice in board meetings, a force that shaped the world without needing to be seen. He'd proven his point. True power didn't announce itself. It simply was. And sometimes, the quietest person in the room was the one who'd built it.